The rain over the moors of Yorkshire was coming down so hard it felt less like weather and more like a physical assault, hammering against the shield charms of the 5 aurors crouched behind a crumbling stone wall. Mud was seeping into their boots, and the taste of copper and ozone filled their mouths. This was the 3rd raid of the week, and like the last 2, it was turning into a disaster. They were pinned down. 150 yards ahead, a fortified farmhouse stood like a black tooth against the gray sky. It was supposed to be a simple safe house, a transit point for Death Eaters moving contraband potions. Instead, it was a fortress. Every time Auror trainee Kingsley Shacklebolt tried to raise his head to fire a stunner, a curse made of purple fire slashed the air, sizzling against the wet stone inches from his face. The enemy had the high ground. They had the numbers, at least 12 wands inside, against 5 outside. And worst of all, the farmhouse was reinforced with ancient structural wards that absorbed magic like a sponge. Check the time. It is 7:12 in the evening. The port key for the backup team has been delayed by anti-transportation jinxes. The lead Auror, a scarred veteran named Gowdy, is bleeding from a cut above his eye. He checks his wand. The wood is hot, vibrating with the strain of holding the shield. He knows the math. In 4 minutes, their shields will fracture under the barrage. In 5 minutes, the Death Eaters will realize the Aurors are exhausted and will flank them. In 6 minutes, they will all be dead. Gowdy looks at the farmhouse walls. They had hit that masonry with 3 Confringo blasts and a reductor curse that could have cracked a vault door. The farmhouse hadn't even shuddered. It was impossible. It was a stalemate that only the bad guys could win. Gowdy tightened his grip on his wand, preparing to order a retreat that would likely get them killed anyway. He didn't know that 200 miles south, buried deep in a sub-basement of the Ministry of Magic, the only reason he was about to survive was a piece of children's sidewalk chalk. Linnea Voss hated the smell of ink. It was too permanent, too arrogant. Ink assumed you were right the first time. Linnea was rarely right the first time, which was why she preferred chalk. It was dusty, impermanent, and humble. It was also the reason her fellow Ravenclaws had laughed at her for 7 years. They called her the toddler. While they were writing complex arithmancy charts on parchment with expensive eagle feather quills, Linnea was on her hands and knees in the common room, sketching drifting, chaotic lines on the stone floor with a stub of white limestone. She felt the magic better that way. She could feel the vibrations of the castle through her fingertips. But in the middle of a war, nobody wanted an artist. They wanted soldiers. Because her dueling scores were abysmal and her nerves were shot, the Ministry had shoved her into the Department of Magical Maintenance, specifically the Cartography Support Division. It was a polite way of saying she was a janitor for maps. Her office was a windowless cupboard that smelled of stale paper and heating charms. In the center of the room lay the master map of Great Britain's subterranean ley lines. It was a massive, enchanted parchment stretched across a table the size of a billiard board. It showed the magical nervous system of the country, sewers, old mine shafts, ley lines, and the structural foundations of wizarding dwellings. Her job was simple: monitor the map for tremors. If a tunnel collapsed in Wales, she filled out a form. If a sewer burst in Diagon Alley, she sent a memo. It was boring, useless work for a witch who wanted to help fight the darkness consuming her world. But 3 weeks ago, out of sheer boredom, Linnea had taken a piece of blue chalk from her pocket and drawn a circle around a location in Bristol where the map showed a strange heat signature. She didn't use a spell, she just drew a circle, pressing the chalk into the fibers of the enchanted parchment. The next morning, she read a report that a Death Eater safe house in Bristol, the exact spot she had circled, had suffered a catastrophic plumbing failure during a raid, flooding the basement and forcing the dark wizards to surrender. It was a coincidence. It had to be. But Linnea was a Ravenclaw, and she didn't believe in coincidences that happened 3 times in a row. She started experimenting. She realized that the master map wasn't just a passive image. It was sympathetically linked to the physical locations it depicted. It was a voodoo doll made of paper. And because she used chalk, which was made of calcium carbonate, the same material as limestone and marble mortar, her drawings didn't just sit on the map. They resonated with the stone foundations of the real buildings. Back in the rain, the situation has gone from desperate to critical. A curse has shattered the stone wall protecting Kingsley. He scrambles back through the mud, his cloak steaming. The Death Eaters are laughing now. They know they have won. Inside the farmhouse, the dark wizards are comfortable. They are protected by wards that reflect magic back at the attacker. They don't feel the ground trembling. They don't feel the subtle shift in the vibrational frequency of the mortar holding the stones together. In the map room, Linnea is sweating. The room is silent, but in her head she can hear the screams of the battle. The map is glowing angry red at the coordinates of the Yorkshire farmhouse. She can see the pulses of light representing the aura's spells fading. They are running out of energy. She has a stick of yellow chalk in her hand. It is trembling. She knows what she has to do. But the margin for error is terrifying. If she draws the rune of structural dissonance too deeply, she could collapse the ground under the auras, swallowing them into the earth. If she draws it too lightly, nothing happens, and they die. This isn't precise wand work. This is finger painting with geological forces. She closes her eyes and touches the chalk to the map. The parchment feels hot, like feverish skin. She visualizes the farmhouse. Not the people inside, but the stone. The heavy, ancient slate of the roof. The thick granite of the walls. She feels the tension in the mortar. The building is holding its breath, bracing against the aura's attacks. Linnea needs to make it exhale. She presses down. The chalk snaps with a dry crack, but she keeps drawing, dragging the broken stump in a jagged, aggressive zigzag line right through the foundation of the farmhouse on the map. She grinds the dust into the paper. whispering a nursery rhyme she used to sing to remember the rhythm of breaking stone. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts is already touching your heart, and you would like to help keep these stories alive, you can support the channel by clicking the thanks button below the video. Every little bit helps me continue bringing you more hidden tales of courage and magic. On the moors, Gowdy screams for everyone to get down. He doesn't know why, he just feels it. The air pressure suddenly drops. The sound of the rain changes. It's no longer hitting solid stone. It's hitting something loose. The farmhouse, which had stood for 200 years and withstood bombardments that would level a castle, gives a sound like a dying giant. It is a low, grinding groan that vibrates in the aura's teeth. Inside the farmhouse, the Death Eaters stop laughing. The leader, a masked wizard firing curses from the upper window, suddenly realizes that the floor beneath his feet is no longer flat. It is tilting. The structural wards are still perfectly intact. The anti-magic shield is still up. But the physical mortar, the actual dirt and rock holding the house together, has simply decided to stop working. The physics of the building have been rewritten by a girl 300 miles away. Linnea sees the ink on the map bleed. The jagged yellow line she drew is glowing. She pushes harder, her fingernails scraping against the parchment, her fingers coated in yellow dust. She is crying with the effort. It feels like she is trying to push a boulder uphill with her mind. She adds a second element, a spiral of blue chalk right in the center of the roof. This is the silly part. It's a doodle, a child's drawing of a whirlwind. But on the sympathetic link, it translates as a massive, localized downdraft of kinetic energy. The roof of the farmhouse doesn't explode outward. That is what spells do. This is different. The roof implodes. It simply gives up, with a sound that cracks the sky louder than thunder. The slate tiles dissolve into dust. The heavy oak beams scream and snap like matchsticks. The entire second floor of the fortress pancakes down onto the first floor. The walls bulge outward, looking like wet cardboard, and then slump into the mud. It takes 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, a fortress becomes a tomb. The cloud of dust billows out, instantly flattened by the rain. The silence that follows is absolute. Gowdy slowly lifts his head from the mud. He blinks, wiping rain from his eyes. The farmhouse is gone. In its place is a heap of rubble not much taller than a man. There is no magical residue, no smell of dark curses or ozone, just the smell of wet, pulverized rock. The wards are gone because there is nothing left for them to anchor to. "Check the perimeter," Gowdy croaks, his voice shaking. "Wands out." They approach the ruin carefully. There is movement in the rubble. A hand sticks out, waving a white handkerchief in surrender. The Death Eaters who survived are trapped, pinned under beams, half buried in masonry that turned to sand and then back to rock. They are terrified. They don't understand what hit them. They keep shouting about an earthquake, about a titan, about the ground eating them. They surrender without casting a single spell. Gowdy looks at the ruin. He kicks a piece of stone. It crumbles under his boot like dry biscuit. He frowns. He has seen reductor curses. He has seen blasting hexes. He has seen giants smash walls. This is none of those. This looks like the building just got tired and sat down. He looks up at the sky, wondering if a god had intervened. Back in the ministry, Linnea slumps back in her chair. Her hands are shaking uncontrollably. Her fingers are stained yellow and blue, the dust worked deep into her cuticles. The map has returned to normal, the angry red glow fading to a neutral gray. The farmhouse is marked now as ruin/impossible. She stares at her hands. She feels exhausted, hollowed out, as if she had run a marathon. She reaches for a rag and slowly, methodically wipes the chalk from her fingers. Nobody came into the room to congratulate her. There were no medals. The report filed by Aura Gowdy listed the cause of the victory as structural failure due to unknown magical resonance. The Department of Mysteries sent a team to investigate the site, but they found nothing but rubble. They assumed the Death Eaters had botched a ritual. But the pattern continued. Over the next 6 months, the war began to turn. Not in the flashy duels in the atrium, but in the raids on the outskirts. Safe houses collapsed. Bridges used by snatchers developed sudden, impassable cracks moments before the enemy could cross. Tunnels used to smuggle dark artifacts caved in gently and precisely, trapping the smugglers for arrest. The auras began to joke that the earth itself had rejected you-know-who. They called it Gaia's luck. They walked into battles with a strange new confidence, feeling that the ground was on their side. They didn't know that Gaia was a 22-year-old muggle-born witch with ink smudges on her nose and chalk dust in her hair, sitting alone in a room that smelled of old paper, fighting the war one doodle at a time. Linnea never told anyone. Who would believe her? Who would believe that the tide of the First Wizarding War was being turned by the same magic children used to play hopscotch? She didn't need the glory. She realized that her kid stuff, her refusal to use the proper ink and quills, was her greatest strength. Ink sat on the surface. Chalk became part of the stone. One evening, months later, Kingsley Shacklebolt stopped by the Cartography Support Division to drop off a request for a new surveillance map. He found Linnea asleep at her desk, her head resting on her arms. The great map hummed quietly beneath her. Kingsley noticed the colorful smudges on the map. Little circles, stars, and jagged lines drawn in pastel chalk. He smiled, thinking she had been passing the time with idle doodles. He reached out to wake her, but then he saw her hands. They were coated in the same dust that coated the ruins he had been pulling survivors out of for months. He paused. He looked at the map, then at the specific blue circle around a cave system in Wales that had collapsed just yesterday, saving his life. He looked at the girl, sleeping the sleep of the dead. He didn't wake her. He quietly placed the requisition form on the table, and then, with a reverence usually reserved for Dumbledore himself, he placed a fresh box of high-quality, unbreakable chalk next to her hand. He walked out, closing the door softly. The war was loud and full of fire and screaming. But in the silence of the map-room, the real battles were being won. Sometimes, the smallest spell is the one that saves the castle. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts touched your heart, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Linnea's place? Would you have stayed in the shadows or demanded credit for saving the auras? Like the video, share it with another Harry Potter fan, and subscribe to hear more hidden stories of courage, magic, and impossible odds.